We explain the rise of the Portuguese explorers and traders. In 1973, Erik attempted to answer the question of what led Portugal to be the European nation that got the age of exploration rolling. His explanation assesses the national interests and economic ambitions of a people who just fought for freedom against Castile and Leon in Spain. He looked at a Catholic nation that was fighting Islam on the peninsula and in the Crusades. Portugal also had a lack of agriculture and therefore invested heavily in the fishing industry. These circumstances left Portugal cut off from the rest of the European land trade, so they engineered their way out by continuing to invest in sailing technology and also pairing up with Genoa to create an alternate trade route that would destroy the Venetian and Ottoman monopoly on trade. In 1317, King Denis traded up with the Genoese merchant Manuel Pisciana. The Genoese would provide the funds for Portugal to build a navy, and the Portuguese would allow the Genoese to build a port city on the Atlantic. In the century that followed, the continuing war against Spain would lead King John I to launch a sneak attack on CEUTA in North Africa, which was being held by the Islamic Fez and their allies in Castile. Not only would this open the African gateway, but John would get the Pope to classify the battle as a crusade, which would allow him the ability to take and keep slaves. This would be an action that would change the future of Africa, Europe, and the Americas. Enter Prince Henry the Navigator. By 1434, Prince Henry had built a fleet of caravels with the latest sailing technology and weapons, and then financed a series of expeditions down the African coast and to the Azores. These journeys brought back pepper and goods from the mouth of the Islamic Saharan trade routes, which also included African slaves. The goal of Prince Henry and the Portuguese was to find the source of the trade routes in India and build an alternative. Each journey pushed Portugal farther and farther down Africa's west coast. There was not a lot of gold to be found, but their journeys began the hereditary slave trade, the age of European imperialism, and mercantilism. Finally, in 1488, Bartolomé Diaz and his crew rounded the Cape of Good Hope. Columbus's expedition to the west rushed the timeline for the Portuguese. In 1498, so they didn't lose the trade advantage in the Indies to Spain, Vasco da Gama's fleet made it to Calcutta in India, where they thought the Hindu temples were Christian churches, and they also angered the Muslim merchants because Europe had non-desirable goods to trade, like wool cloth and iron pots. Plus, they threatened the established trading order. The Portuguese came back with bigger guns and silver on the next trip, and then returned home with a ship filled with pepper, which netted da Gama a profit of 6,000%. They built a port in India at Goa to secure their control. Then they took control of the spice trade in the Malay Peninsula after 1510. By 1514, they reached the Spice Islands of the Moluccas and secured a monopoly on cloves. They made it to China, where they leased the port city of Macau. By 1542, they reached Japan, which would set in motion the eventual Japanese isolation due to overenthusiastic Portuguese missionaries and merchants. In one journey, Pedro Cabral sailed off course and landed in Brazil. Portugal was now a global empire.